Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya, and today we have with us once again Arpit Joshipura, General Manager and SVP at the Linux Foundation and Head of LF India. Arpit, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
You wear a lot of hats at the Linux Foundation, and now you have a new hat. And if you look at Linux Foundation, it's a global organization helping open source communities around the globe. So I'm curious, what is the vision and idea behind LF India?
That's an excellent question. And what we have announced is the expansion of what we call global open source support and innovation. Now, multiple technologies are important, but not all the technologies are important, specifically in countries like India. So what we have done, and the reason we're doing this in India is just three simple objectives, right? We're there to promote open source collaboration with the India ecosystem, so enterprises, startups, IGOs, government organizations, etc. We're there to invest in developer relations, training, events like meetups and big events, and allow people to play in sandbox labs for innovation of cool use cases that are very India specific. And then we're there to support India's mission of what we call DPI. And this is with cutting edge technologies in 5 areas, right? Whether it's blockchain, cloud, telecommunications, edge, and domain specific AI. So we are there to promote, invest, and support India's mission and LF's mission. Now, on your question, why we're global? As you know, open source is a global phenomena. It is there for innovation, and in India, just to give you some stats, we had 13.2 million open source developers in India just in 2024. Okay, and we expect a huge growth to happen in India in the next 5 years, and so we want local collaboration, but with a global impact.
And can you also talk about how does Linux Foundation look at India as a player in the open source space?
There are 3 buckets in how we look at things. Okay, the phase 1, which is in the last 5 years, what has happened is, global companies. I wouldn't say U.S. companies, global companies, right? Whether they are the AT&Ts or the Deutsche Telecoms or the Infosys of the world. It doesn't matter where the headquarters are, but they operate in multiple countries. Those countries have R&D in India and elsewhere, right? And so in the last 5 years, the enterprises have really adopted open source in multiple domains that I just talked about, and they're contributing. So as we said, India is the number 2 contributor on GitHub from an open source perspective, right behind United States. Okay, so that is what is happening. The phase we are getting into is local collaboration is required because a lot of the use cases are extremely specific to India, or as a matter of fact, to Europe, right? Like LF Europe is focused on security, cybersecurity requirements, federation requirements, etc., that are Europe specific. Same way, Indian government, IGOs, nonprofits, and enterprises that operate in India have very specific requirements that are use case driven. And so now the next phase is about fulfilling those requirements. Now, the beauty of open source and how we see it is it will very quickly evolve into the phase where those use cases have global applicability. And once that happens, and by default, the open source developers push things back into the main line of projects, right? So you already have things that are developed in India for Indian use cases back into the main line, which allows for global collaboration and use. So we look at it as a huge, not just market, but a huge community that is very skilled, is already one of the top contributors from an enterprise perspective, but now they are gaining more and more local use cases that can be exported to the world.
A few years ago, LF Europe was launched. So is LF India going to be a parallel organization to LF Europe, focusing on Indian subcontinent, or is it going to be a different kind of organization?
LF India, the way it's set up, is not set up as LF Europe. It is a light touch setup which allows all of the developers to contribute directly back into the main LF. Okay, so from a membership or participation perspective, we have not separated the two, primarily because India is an ally of US and globally participating already, and the laws are very global friendly from that perspective. So the setup is an entity which again points back to the LF global, from a membership, from a participation, etc., etc. What is local is we already have three staff in LF, including some of the directors that will be helping drive some of this. We have local partnerships. We announced several partnerships with training organizations, with labs in Bangalore, Hyderabad, etc., etc. We're working with them to have their developers participate in projects, show the demos, push code upstream, etc., etc. So it kind of feels like an extension of the global collaboration with a local presence and local requirements. And that's kind of what our model is, versus keeping it distinct from the main LF.
If you look at Linux Foundation, it's a foundation of foundations that host different projects within those foundations. Are there any specific foundation or project that is targeted at India?
So we've looked at, over the last 5 years, we have looked at what the government priorities are, which areas of technologies are getting investments, what subsegments of the verticals are critical from an infrastructure perspective, and where Linux Foundation can help. So obviously, an important government initiative is, road infrastructure. Clearly, Linux Foundation is not participating in that. We can't help. But there are other technologies and initiatives that we can help. Specifically, the critical industries that have been identified where we are already there and we're already helping. One of them is blockchain. So the technology enabler for sub-foundation is LF Decentralized Trust, which has already been adopted by several frameworks, right? Including financial transactions, including Digiatra and some of the local blockchain technologies. They're already using and participating in our projects. So that's one. The other critical infrastructure is telecommunications, edge and IoT. So all of the 5G work and all the IoT connectivity that is going on in India, beyond just the geos and the Bhartis providing coverage, there's a lot of specific use cases on open source. So technologies, sub-projects like LF Networking, LF Edge, they're participating in that. And then we have two of our what we call horizontal sub-foundations that are fundamental building blocks of any open source. One is CNCF, which is Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So this is where we want to make sure that any work that happens, whether it's in cloud or whether it's in any of the verticals, follows cloud native principles. So they are participating. And another big one is OpenSSF, which gives the security framework for open source. And that is very critical for India ecosystem to happen. So that's kind of the first phase. In each of these, we have a lot of domain-specific AI work that is going on. And when I say domain-specific, it's not the general LLMs and things like that, but it is very specific to telecom or very specific to security or very specific to edge, etc. Okay, so that's the initial phase that we have launched with. We've also provided what we call foundation support. So all of leadership support. Our training department has partnered locally, and we are having local training courses, local developer, both free and kind of working with a partner. We have a lab that's set up in Bangalore with with partners locally. And then we're going to host some of the largest events this year in 2025, two of them being Open Source Summit and KubeCon, both coming in August in Hyderabad. So you can see the type of local support we are giving, not just the technology, but also the foundation support in terms of staff and events and marketing and things like that.
I'll go back to LF Europe. When LF Europe was announced, it also launched some new projects that were aimed at Europe. Are you going to announce new projects aimed at India?
No, because as I said, the value is on global collaboration. The government has made it clear that it is going to work in a global setup. And so all the projects will be upstreamed back into the main line of all the sub-foundations. So there's no India-specific branch. Now, having said that, if there's a local company with a very extreme use case that they feel that's not required globally, open source does not prevent any of those kind of solutions. But we do recommend not to fork so that everybody else gets benefit of the community.
If you look at LF Energy, it is a great example of a collaboration between Linux Foundation and Europe. Two major European players, RT and Elander, kind of created the foundation to solve one of the biggest challenges that the energy sector is facing, which is migrate from the traditional legacy model to modern digitized model, and also help us deal with the climate crisis. Are there any problems, challenges specific to India that LF India is going to focus on?
Yeah, so all these things that you talked about, whether it's energy, AI, I would even add agriculture, RISC-V, etc. So all of those are phase 2 and beyond for a couple of reasons. We want to make sure that things that are already in motion and developers are already contributing on this in terms of the critical infrastructure happens first. We still are, globally working with the energy companies, not just in Europe, but in US and in elsewhere, to kind of change the mindset of why open source is going to speed up innovation, right? So there's still some time to go before adoption of open source is happening. So the focus of LF Energy or LF AI data, like those things will be more on awareness and making sure that they understand the value and speed of innovation, versus the focus of phase 1 launch is it's here today, people are using it, they are implementing it, they are adding to it, let's go.
Can you talk about what is going to be the organizational structure of LF India?
Yeah, so the governance structure is fairly flat. We have about 3 or 4 directors, as we call it in the entity, right, like that are part of this organization. Effectively, that's just the light touch setup. The technical governance is exactly the same as with any other projects, right? So there is a TSC, Technical Steering Committee, for the projects. They can participate using Linux Foundation IDs and things like that. Meritocracy drives the technical projects, et cetera, et cetera. And then the governing board of each of these foundations have been made aware and are supportive of any strategic requirement or funding or insertion or collaboration that's needed for their particular domain to expand work in India. So it's a very light touch governance that everybody is used to in the bigger, broader Linux Foundation.
Now, if you look at LF India, who is the target audience or the constituency or the stakeholders? Is it the government entities, businesses, or individual developers?
The 3 main constituents of who we will be working with, obviously, number 1 is obviously the IGO, so Indian government, and its subsidiary, CDOT, and a lot of other local telecommunications and financial institutions like that. So that's number 1. Then you will have, enterprises that are participating in the Linux Foundation already, but they are local, like the Infosys of the world, for example, and they are a big supporter of this. And then, of course, there will be a huge third bucket in universities. So we have collaborations and work going on, projects like iOS MCN that we are supporting with engineers and local people that are local to India, but universities and projects like that are government funded, as well as startups, right? So a huge body of startup ecosystem, and most of those we see in are solving smaller use cases like IoT, edge, things like that. But all those four buckets are the ones that we are going to be, working with.
Since I live and breathe open source, I assume everything is open source, which is unfortunately not the case. Can you talk about the importance of open source for countries like India?
Sure. And you said it well. Open source is gaining worldwide momentum. But there are 5 reasons, particularly, these are global reasons, but the reasons why India is taking such an active role in this, right? And it starts with the government policies. So if you look at the government policies, it is extremely descriptive that, from a security perspective, it is all needs to be open source based, right? Their DPI work, their digital public infrastructure, as they call it, it's all needs to have open source. It's very similar to how the US government and the Department of Defense on anything 5G has spelled out as open source. So that's the most important reason. The second most important reason why it's gaining traction, it's end user driven. So if an end user participates and changes the game, then the vendors follow suit. Of course, it has shared R&D, so a huge amount of TCO savings. Yes, India may think of open source as free, but enterprise open source for critical infrastructure, yes, it is technically free, but the cost is in participation, contribution, things like that. And then the other advantage that they want to take is on the rapid deployment and bug fixes, which is a key attribute of why open source. And again, let's keep in mind, this software that they want to use, almost 60 to 80% of the stack is non-differentiated. So this is not like, companies in India or US or anywhere in the world are going to take to sort of make $1 billion IPO because, they own the software. It's non-differentiated. It's the plumbing software, as we call it, but it makes up 70 to 80% of the stack. And that's where they come together. They want to share it and reduce that R&D cost completely as much as possible. So those are the main reasons why we are seeing such a huge traction in open source, and particularly in India.
While India is among the leading contributors to many open source projects, what we have not seen is the emergence of major open source projects, or products that come from India are fully open source, which could be very well a cultural phenomenon. Will the creation of LF India bring that cultural change, which would lead us to see more tech companies start releasing their own code as open source, in addition to being a consumer and contributing to open source?
So yes, you got it right. Like contribution, India is number 2, but using and innovating with open source from a culture perspective is what one of our goals is, right? So it starts with the first step, which is training, awareness, and process participation. So you can only do the final phase of innovative and disrupting with open source if you're participating, right? And so that's one of the goals of LF India, to train, to have people do POCs, things like that. Once you are good at it, and once you start becoming, contributors and leaders in that particular domain, all of a sudden, you can think of use cases that build on top, which are India specific, right? So that's the phase we are in, as I talked about, and that's we want to spread it out to the world. The final phase, once you're good at it, right, which takes a few years, is when extreme disruptive technologies are being set up. And there's no more powerful tool than open source to build these disruptive technologies. And I think India is on a path for that in the next 5 years, according to what we see. But the building block of that is open source, because they don't have to reinvent basic stuff that is already available on the open source, which I call the plumbing layer, right? Like connecting to a cloud, or starting a hardware, or writing drivers, or orchestrating processes inside a system, or finding a blockchain project like Hyperledger or Fabric that puts it all together. Those problems have been solved, so build on that. That's kind of how we see it. So yes, we do expect innovation and disruption significantly in the next 5 years, and that's what we want to do: support, enable, and hopefully drive.
Arpit, thank you so much for taking time out today and talk about LF India. I look forward to our next discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.